From KUOW in Seattle, this is Soundside, and I am Jason Burrows. This week, we are taking some time off, and we are playing our favorite segments from the past few months. Coming up on the show today, we'll hear about drama at the Ren Fair. And I'm not talking about untoward slights against chivalry. Natalie Graham wrote about the many accusations flying at the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair, and we'll hear about that in about 15 minutes. But first, back in January, we took an excursion out to the Olympic exclusion zone. No idea what that is? Then you've probably been missing out on the wildly creative and downright spooky video game Pacific Drive. Libby Dankman sat down with Cassandra Draycott, CEO and creative director of Ironwood Studios, to talk about the game, which is set right here in the Pacific Northwest. Here's Libby.
Last night, I broke out the old PlayStation 5 for some relaxing gaming time. I was driving up a hill to get to this ominous-looking facility at the top of a mountain, and all of a sudden the sky turns red, and I wake up a little while later, and now I'm supposed to find a way out of here, I guess. Luckily, I chose the easy mode, so I can run into these trees all day long.
Oh, well. You're alive.
The title of this game is Pacific Drive. It came out last year from Seattle-based Ironwood Studios, and it's made a big splash for the company. So much so that Hollywood is taking notice. Saw creator James Wan's production company announced last month it has optioned Pacific Drive to develop it into a television series. The Pacific Northwest is home to some major power players in the gaming industry, but this is a big win for an indie gaming studio. And the game pays homage to the area with a setting that feels familiar, the Olympic Peninsula in 1998, albeit an alternate timeline, extra creepy version of the peninsula. We wanted to learn more about the role of the Pacific Northwest in the game's creation and what success means for this local independent company. Cassandra Draycott is the CEO and creative director of Ironwood Studios, the team behind the game Pacific Drive. Hey, Cassandra, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I've started the game, but to live fully in my truth, I am a huge wimp, and so it's too scary for me. So what I've been doing is watching my husband play over his shoulder, which is usually the other way around. In my house, I am the gamer of the house. It's just with anything a little bit stressful and scary, I get too nervous. But our producer, Jason Burrows here, also loves the game and loves the style, and we all love just the vibe that it creates. What drew you to survival horror as a genre?
I definitely I've always been a fan of survival games because of the plate juggling, right? It's making these critical decisions that affect, me as a player, me as a person, and I think you're gonna laugh. We definitely didn't make the game intending it to be a horror game. It was something that happened a little bit organically along the way. Like we wanted mysterious and surreal and strange, and I think. Maybe this speaks to my own personal experience and bias, but I found, driving out in the woods and in the Northwest a really, relaxing, experience. But for, understandably, a lot of people driving around at night in the dark alone with spooky sounds does start to tend towards horror. And we lent a little into it as the game developed, but it definitely wasn't the initial pitch. Like we didn't go and being like, this will be the spookiest driving game you've ever played or anything like that.
I mean, horror is in the eye of the beholder, right? For me, it's
Absolutely.
horror. For other people, Jason argues that it's not that scary. So we have a difference of opinion there. Talk to me about, you grew up here in the Pacific Northwest. Obviously, it's a huge part of the inspiration for the game. How did your experiences growing up here kind of play into the alternate version of the Olympic Peninsula that we see in the game?
So I grew up in Portland. I spent a year in San Diego, but most of my, last 10 years has been here in Seattle, and I've fallen in love with the area. There's all of this wonderful different nature. There's weird abandoned sites. There's amazing people and all these different biomes from the, temperate rainforest to desert to mountains. And we pretty much are insanely spoiled with what we have access to within a 2-hour drive. And, when I was younger, it was a lot of trips, right? We would go camping. We would go to the beach. I was even working a couple of driving jobs, so it was definitely like a integral part of, getting around and seeing the area that I grew up in. And as I got older, I would start doing these trips where I would go out and I would drive to abandoned sites and I would take reference photography and just see these interesting industrial places that have long since become overgrown. I'm a big fan of like a juxtaposition between brutalism and nature, and I think that, translates pretty heavily into the game that is Pacific Drive for sure.
Yeah, very directly. Did you ever do like delivery jobs, kind of the way that the game starts out, you're trying to make a delivery?
Not quite. I worked as a merchandiser for a beer distributor, so I would go to all of these different stores in the day. But it meant, for a good chunk of the day, I would go and, be on the road or in a store. You'd learn all the roads, you'd learn the best way to go with traffic, and it also meant having a car as like a pretty integral part of your life, because, it was one of those you drive and then you get paid for your gas kind of jobs.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me more about the feelings that you wanted to bring to the game. I mean, this is more than just using the Pacific Northwest as scenery. You have the gorgeous, trees and sort of the forest settings, the sound design. What are the feelings that you wanted to bring to the audience in using the Pacific Northwest as your setting?
So for us, it's kind of a contrast, right? Where we wanted to create this sense of danger and mystery while you're out in the zone, spotted with a little bit of, just appreciation of the place that you're in. But we contrasted that with the garage and where it's safe and where you can work on your car. And through all of that, you're forming this relationship with this old station wagon. It's your real only travel companion. It's both narratively and mechanically important to you. And so trying to build that up and not overdo it in one direction, right? We wanted to make sure that there was pressure, but we also wanted to make sure that there was moments of relaxation.
It also feels very true to old Pacific Northwest ethos, for me at least, where you kind of drive the car into the ground and then you figure out ways to keep it running. Like,
Hmm.
this is not a Southern California sports car centric, culture. This is like, a hatchback Subaru style. The car in the game is not a Subaru, but I got Subaru-esque vibes from the way that it became kind of a main character, and you're trying to just keep it going to keep your lifeline going. I
Absolutely.
don't know if you have any any resonance with that.
Oh yeah, I mean, my family drove Volvos, so that was like the first car that I learned to drive on, and then eventually, as an adult, I ended up buying an old station wagon right around when the game started really coming into fruition. I bought an '89 Buick LeSabre. And
Nice.
so learning how to keep that running has been interesting. But for me, it's always been about the stories that come from being on the road and traveling and being alone with a car, right? There's this huge sense of isolation that comes with both the game and my own experiences in the Northwest, where there's something incredibly pleasant about being effectively by yourself and just absorbing the contrast of these gigantic mountains and foggy forests.
There is a strong history of games set in the Pacific Northwest. My personal favorite from my childhood was Shadowrun, which I played on the Sega Genesis. There's The Last of Us 2, Alan Wake, Fallout 2 is set in Oregon. Do you have a favorite of a game that's set in the Pacific Northwest besides your own? Or did you feel any pressure to kind of make this distinct the way that Pacific Drive felt and had a rooting in place here?
I've always been a huge fan of the Life is Strange series, and
Oh, nice.
they've got I'm actually like playing a bunch of them again right now, but like it's based in Washington and Oregon and up and down the West Coast, and I think there's some pretty heavy inspiration, especially on the music side from those games to Pacific Drive.
So you're about to hit the year anniversary of the release of the game. You're getting a lot of new attention because of the optioning here from James Wan. I mean, where is your head at in terms of where the future of this story could go?
Uh, well, I'm definitely, internally I'm very, very excited. So we've been working on content updates for the game since it released back in February, and we're working on, I would say, probably our biggest one yet. I can't really talk details, but everyone on the team is just very, very excited. And beyond that, obviously the option for the TV show is us just I think still a little floored with the reception and the love for the game, and things are just getting started. We're pretty excited.
How is it for an indie game creator these days in the Seattle area? I mean, what does it feel like to get a project like this to fruition and see the reception that you've gotten so far?
I mean, it's honestly, so I think I used the word surreal, and I think that's correct. Like it is, we are beyond like proud of what we've made, and so like fortunate with the reception and the attention that we've been getting. It's it's been very surreal because as an indie dev, it is a tough time, right? Like the industry is going through massive layoffs. We are going through a period of change in the gaming industry as a whole. And, while we have found success, like it doesn't mean it's been the same for everyone. And I think one of the things that I would say that I love the most about the Seattle industry is how much like general support there has been from so many people. Like I've been here around a decade working and I've met people from tons of different studios. I've worked at multiple studios and I can say for sure that, while obviously Ironwood wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the team and how amazing they've been, like we also wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a ton of support from just the people around us. Um, and that is still one of my favorite things about the gaming industry as a whole is that there is that outpouring of support. Um, it's something I try to and look forward to being able to give back to.
Are there creative projects, new ideas for games that the success with Pacific Drive is going to enable you to tackle that maybe you wouldn't have been able to before?
I think absolutely. I can't speak in details, but I think we're
Give me all
creators.
the specs, Cassandra. I
Yeah,
want
we can't
everything.
break every NDA, no, yeah, we're really excited. Having a success like Pacific Drive does open the door for us to figure out, hey, what do we want to work on next? What makes sense, for the team, and I think we're looking forward to something pretty cool.
With the optioning, I mean, you just have no guarantees of where that goes next, right? Like something can be, something that is your baby, but then when it's picked up by other creative minds, that can be also a little stressful, right? I mean, how are you feeling as this process of potentially making Pacific Drive into a television show goes forward? I mean, are there any hopes or fears that you have in the next few months and years as this is in development?
So I think there's always some level of nervousness because it's new, right? So starting a studio was new for me. It's the first time I've ever done it. I asked a lot of questions and I learned a lot, and here we are. And I think getting involved in the Hollywood side of things is also relatively new, and I've asked a lot of questions and I've learned a lot, and we're just starting out that journey. I think that for me, as someone who's created an IP with a group of people, I value what other people see in the IP. And so, in the same way that I'm working with a team of ridiculously talented folks at Ironwood, seeing them take their own interpretation of what we're making is very special to me. I think with the right people involved on a different medium, seeing their interpretation and working with them, like there are important things to the IP without a doubt, and that's where, our job is to help be the steward of it. But, none of us are like filmmaking experts, right? Like we wouldn't know the first thing to do, and as a result, being able to talk with experts like any of the folks at Atomic Monster, like it's been fantastic. We're really excited to work with them.
In a dream scenario, who should be cast as the driver, and why should it be Nicolas Cage?
Oh, I did. That's a tough one. I mean, Nicolas Cage has so much range.
Exactly.
He
Exactly.
does. It's funny.
Imagine dropping Nick Cage into that environment.
I genuinely the what is it? The Color Out of Space is one of his films.
Yeah, yeah.
I really did like that one, but I recently I've been doing these like large scale binge watches where friends were like we watched like every Jackie Chan movie. And I think we're gonna watch every Nicolas Cage movie at some point in the future. Just I think we watched every Bond movie. We're just kind of picking a large chunk of film and just going through all of it. But yeah, Nicolas Cage he's a character.
Amazing future for Ironwood Studios to watch that unfold, and also the other projects that you're going to be tackling. I know you mentioned that you have updates that you're really excited about. Your team is for Pacific Drive. Cassandra Draycott, CEO and creative director of Ironwood Studios, the team behind the game Pacific Drive. Really appreciate your time today, and congrats on all your success.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
You're listening to Soundside, and when we come back, The Stranger's Natalie Graham talks about shenanigans out at the Ren Fair. That's after the break here on KUOW. You're listening to Soundside. I'm Jason Burrows, and one of the staples of being a nerd in the Pacific Northwest is making the pilgrimage out to the Ren Fair. The fair kicks off next Saturday and will run for 5 straight weekends at the Sky Meadows grounds just outside of Monroe. Not everyone is in the mood to revel, however. Allegations of mismanagement and abuse have threatened to derail some of the fun promised in the village of Merriwick. Libby Denkman sat down with Natalie Graham to discuss her investigation into those allegations back in June, and here's that conversation.
The Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair is the largest Ren Fair in the state. It'll bring out fairies, pirates, knights in shining armor, and more for 5 weeks starting in mid-July near the Skykomish River outside of Monroe. It has a whole lot of fans, including one of our colleagues at KUOW, Vicki Van Hout. She says Ren Fairs are all about dressing up in medieval garb, dancing to medieval-themed music, archery, axe throwing. You know, it's a celebration of cosplay and history altogether.
I'm a huge fan of things like The Lord of the Rings. I like dressing for the part. I like engaging in a community who is all really engaged and out to teach and hang out and have a really good time and drink and laugh and sing and dance and all that. Huge fan of all of that together.
But not everybody is happy with the state of the fair. They say something's amiss. And it's not the pirates hitting the grog too hard or Mistress Tiddlywink's donkey breaking into the Cabbage Patch again. The village of Merriwick, a.k.a. the fictional home of the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair, is at the center of a new investigative report in the summer edition of Seattle Met. The story details a series of allegations about management's treatment of volunteer staff and questions about their financial priorities, as well as bigger questions about the changes that some argue are sacrificing the soul of the fair. Natalie Graham is a staff writer at The Stranger and freelancer with Seattle Met, and she spent months researching this story. Natalie, thank you so much for being here. I encourage everybody, by the way, to go read the story in Seattle Met because it has great photos. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here and to spill the piping hot mead, maybe.
That's great. We're going to do this all in character, the full time. So how did you first get involved with the story? Because I hear that there's kind of an interesting series of events that brought you to reporting on the Ren Fair.
Yeah, so I know I had to dust the cobwebs off my memory. No, so it started maybe 2 years ago. I was a freelancer full time, and I had freelance written this column for The Stranger. I still am writing it, so you can check that out too, called Playdate, where I try out subcultures and hobbies in Seattle and I write about them. And I was trying to think of a way to do a twist on that and to write for a different outlet. So I pitched the Seattle Met. I'd never been to a Ren Fair. I wanted to know what it was like inside the place where, the tavern where they're serving beer. So I pitched the Seattle Met about shadowing the bar maidens at the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair. So I reached out to the Ren Fair and they were kind of game. And I was like, okay, cool. We're cooking. We can maybe do this story. And then they stopped responding. I'd already pitched the Met. I had to reach back out to my editor, Eric Nussbaum, over there and tell him that the story was pretty much dead. And he was like, okay, well, maybe we can do something on this later. Lo and behold, about a couple weeks go by and there's this tell-all bombshell Reddit post about how the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair is terrible. It's mistreating its staff. It's mistreating its volunteers, which is what most of its workers are. And so Eric at the Seattle Met sent me that and said, hey, do you think there's something here for a story? And I said, yes.
So Chuck the barmaid shadowing Puff Piece and maybe do some reporting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, he basically was like, let's look into this. And yeah, it was a complete gear shift. And so I started looking into it. And in November, Eric reaches back out and says, hey, do you think we can finally write that Ren Fair piece? And I said, sure. And he gave me a 6-month deadline, which to me at the point was unheard of.
That's a dream.
Yeah. So I had some time to dig into it.
So how do these things operate? What is the structure of the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair. And you have mentioned this already, but a lot of this runs on volunteers, right? So first off, how's this structured? And then who are the people who are actually doing the work?
Such a good question. It took me talking to multiple guild workers to figure out the answer. In short, it seems to be a confusing structure, but I will spell it out. So the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair, as it stands right now, is a nonprofit. It has been for like 15 years, and there's a board, and then they have a handful of full-time paid staff employees. But the bulk of the people you see on the ground at the Ren Fair, the character actors, the experiences, the jousters, those types of people, they are guild workers. And guilds are pretty much, they were described to me as like little community theater groups, but they pretty much function as unions, kind of. And the fair will give these guilds a stipend for the weekend or for the entire run of the fair. But historically, the stipend has been pennies. Like they've given a guild of maybe, 15 people, $300 for the weekend. So nobody's living off of this money. And in recent years, after guild members have kind of organized to get better pay as more money is coming in to the Renaissance Fair, as it's getting more popular, they have gotten a standardized wage. And that's a good thing, but it has brought down some of the other... Well, one of the other things I should mention is that, so not only were guilds getting paid not very well, but there was no uniform payment. So different guilds would get maybe a decent amount of money, and then some guilds would get nothing, really.
So a guild that does like sword fighting gets a certain amount, a couple $1,000s maybe, and a guild that plays D&D maybe gets a few hundred. Like there's different amounts.
Right, right. And they kind of don't talk about it either. So there was no uniform payment. That only changed because guild workers had to fight for it.
So the guilds are really the lifeblood of the Renaissance Fair. Like they are the people putting on these performances, or many of the people putting on the performances. They're the folks who are creating the ambiance of a lot of what the visitors experience at the Renaissance Fair. But you write that a lot of the guilds have been leaving the fair in recent years. And folks that you talk to say that it's connected to feelings that management has lost its way in certain ways. What are some of the top concerns? And, this is a really long story. I encourage, again, that folks who are interested can find it at the Seattle Met website. It seems these concerns fall into two different buckets, which is one, treatment of staff, and the other is financial choices. Let's start with treatment of staff. What are the main concerns you heard regarding that?
One of the main complaints is that as the fair has earned more money and has expanded weekends. It used to only be 3 weekends. Now, for the last 2 years, it's been 5 weekends. So that means more work for these guild workers and more money for management. So as the fair has grown and changed, the guild workers are getting fewer perks. So originally they would get free passes for themselves, free passes for friends and family. They got free lunch, things like that. And now they'll only get passes for Sundays, which are kind of the weakest days. There won't be free lunch. And there's just sort of this feeling that the fair, as they say, doesn't really care about them anymore. So there's that kind of hollowing of what once was. And then there are specific incidents. So, for instance, the fair allegedly wouldn't allow one of its workers who was undergoing chemotherapy to run an air conditioner at night in the volunteer camping ground. Allegedly, the fair organizers screamed at people. And there's also a fear of retaliation from these people. So there's actually a clause within Wandering in Time Productions is the for-profit arm that co-runs this fair with the nonprofit, the Washington Renaissance Arts and Education Society. And in the Wandering in Time Productions contract, there's an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which people who pay attention to the law will know is now illegal as of 2022 in Washington state, and yet these contracts I saw were from 2024. But within the NDA, there's a clause that says that fair workers can be fired for speaking ill of the fair. And I talked to people who were actually fired for this. Like they complained that they were being mistreated, and maybe they posted on Facebook. Maybe they just complained to a manager and they were fired for that.
Okay, so those are some of the allegations detailed in your reporting about concerns that volunteers have had about their treatment by management. What about the financial decisions that those volunteers have questioned? What were the concerns there?
This is where things get interesting. So the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair is run by a nonprofit and has been for over a decade. And that is the Washington Renaissance Arts and Education Society. So Reyes had a net revenue of almost $2 million over the last 3 years. And when you dive into these financials, you'll see that the two people in charge of the fair earn six-figure salaries. And at least last year, they paid themselves a $300,000 consulting fee. So there's a lot of money at play in this nonprofit. And to complicate things, these people also run a for-profit that started in 2018, and that's Wandering in Time Productions. We have no insight into what financials Wandering in Time is making. So when you juxtapose the six-figure plus amount of money that these two people who are running the fair are making and how little the fair workers are earning, and yet they are the fair, it's just very stark.
So you reached out to the folks in charge of the fair because this is a number of allegations about their choices and the way they're running things. This is, again, the nonprofit Washington Renaissance Arts and Education Society, or Reyes, and then their for-profit side, which is called Wandering in Time Productions. What did they say in response to the allegations and the story?
They issued a blanket statement about how rising costs have impacted ticket prices and they've resulted in a more selective vendor process. They said that they respond quickly to concerns about anyone who's acted out of line with their community values. But they're really excited to welcome everybody back to the fair this year.
The takeaway from your story that I got was there is a lot of passionate people who love creating this community of the Renaissance Fair. They love participating, being creative, and performing as part of it. And they also care a lot about it. But they are concerned about the direction the fair is taking and that something is being lost in the soul of this event. That includes historical accuracy, education, the soul of the volunteerism effort. They say that this is disappearing as the company makes changes. What do the volunteers say about what's being lost as a result?
When you think about the history of these fairs, they were founded by kind of these eccentric weirdos, people who didn't have a place to be themselves, and then they created one. The fair was founded on those foundations of community, of passion, of love, of eccentricity. And each year, with this turnover, with this loss of guilds, the fair loses some of that color, some of that texture. It's to me, it feels like a smoothing over, a commercialization. You pay more for less.
And who replaces the volunteers when they go away?
Either national acts, people who you could see in any fair, people who are not local from Washington, or you will get people who are not as skilled at a craft, people who the fair has found as last-minute replacements. And the word that I kept hearing in relationship to what's happening to the fair is theme parkification. Originally, this is a grassroots, community-built, community-run event. It for sure had its issues, but right now the Washington Midsummer Renaissance Fair seems to be moving in a direction of commercialization.
But this is a business, right? And I mean, so I'm just reading from part of the statement from Reyes and WITP. So that's the nonprofit and the for-profit arm that run the Ren Fair. And they're saying, that businesses across Washington have seen production costs go up, and the Midsummer Renaissance Fair is no different. As a result, quote, we've had to make difficult decisions, including increasing ticket prices and being more selective and a more selective vendor invitation process to ensure the fair's continued success. So, this is a business, basically. Like, can't they do what makes sense for their business?
They totally can if they're not a nonprofit and if they are paying their workers. I think that it's really the fact that they are doing more to get more money, expanding the weekends, removing the perks, raising ticket prices. But they're doing all of that, and the people whose backs this was built on are getting nothing. And not only that, but the experience is worse for them. So bad, in fact, that they're leaving in droves. And when I talked to these people, they communicated that things had never been perfect at the fair. There's always been these issues. And it takes a lot for somebody who's this passionate about this one thing to up and leave. They form families. They form communities. Like, this is their life. And they've had to abandon it because it's gotten so bad.
Natalie Graham is a reporter whose work can be found in The Stranger and in Seattle Met. Thank you very much, Natalie, for being here.
Thank you so much.
And Soundside reached out to both Reyes and Wandering in Time Productions for their response to Natalie's story. They declined an interview, but they did send us a statement that we'll share in our show notes. As for Vicky Van Hout, our coworker who has tickets to this year's fair, she is still planning to go, but she says she may approach her visit with a new perspective.
What it's making me think most about is how I'm going to engage at the fair. Where are the local guilds that I've heard about? I need to go find these groups. I need to, ask them to teach me things and spend more time engaging in the perhaps less super impressive or famous, but just as much or even more so deserving of the attention, especially because they're local. So they understand this area so much better.
You're listening to Soundside. When we come back, gospel, soul, jazz, and good old blues. MoPop's newest exhibit shines a bright light on the history of Black music, and we've got a backstage tour with curator Adiria Johnson. We'll explore Never Turn Back after the break here on KUOW. You're listening to Soundside. I'm Jason Burrows. Now we're going on a quick field trip to one of the coolest looking buildings in the city. Upstairs at Seattle's Museum of Pop Culture, or MoPop, right now you can take a trip through the musical genres and artists that trace the arc of Black history in America, from gospel foremothers like Rosetta Tharpe and Mahalia Jackson to the soulful singing of Aretha Franklin and Stevie Wonder. The exhibit is called Never Turn Back: Echoes of African American Music. Last month, Libby Denkman caught up with curator Adiria Johnson, who took us on a private tour of the exhibit.
Well, first of all, can you just introduce yourself and tell us where we're standing right now?
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. My name is Adiria Johnson, and I am the associate curator, but I am the lead exhibition curator for Never Turn Back: Echoes of African American Music. We're on the 3rd floor at MoPop, the penthouse. No, I'm just kidding. I'm really happy for y'all to be here, so yeah.
And tell us, how did the concept for this exhibit start?
So I love Black history, and I love music, and I love photography, and so I really wanted to highlight how expression is depicted through photography, and what better way to do that through looking at just the history of Black music. And I feel that, anytime that I've seen performers or Black artists performing live or in photos, it always looks so passionate, and I really wanted to convey that in this exhibition. And then leaning on my skills and my background in African American studies, adding that element of history, and also highlighting that for Black people, pop culture is really tied to our history. And it's not the best history, but that is what makes our expression through pop culture so unique. So to do that in Never Turn Back was really the focal point of how this exhibition came to be.
So when we first entered the exhibit, there was something that caught my eye, and that is a very red, very bedazzled cape.
Yeah.
Tell us, whose cape is it? I think I can guess, but whose cape is
James
that?
Brown, the godfather of soul. Hey.
Get up, get on up, stay on the scene. Get on up like a sex machine. Get on.
It's actually one of 2 James Brown pieces we have in the exhibition. So when you come into the gallery, you'll see this really bright, shiny red sequin cape, the classic cape that he's used in dozens of performances. So to really have that stellar piece welcome folks into the gallery really opens up the idea of what are you going to see in here. So it's the best piece to put in just to welcome folks into the gallery.
It's the piece that you see him, he's down on his knees, he's on the stage, he doesn't know if he can go on, but somehow he does.
Because he's the godfather. He's the godfather. It's so great.
We're obviously standing in MoPop, which is a melted Jimi Hendrix guitar, basically.
Yeah.
And so there's no doubt that MoPop's DNA runs through Black music.
Yeah.
For you, when you were thinking about genre, for example, how did you want to approach kind of the progression of what people would experience when they walk through the exhibit?
I mean, I think for me, I wanted to tell a chronological story, but also highlight the nuances between like sacred and secular music. And I think also to tell the history of like Black music, there is a timeline that works. But I think also to highlight this essence of echoes, like how each genre blends into the next, kind of help narrate like what this exhibition is. So I totally could have added, like an R&B section, or I could have added a funk section or a disco section. But gospel, blues, jazz, and soul are really those strong pillars that get us those other subgenres like ragtime or new jack swing or hip hop. So to really conceptualize like these bigger things, it's also that skill in like curation. So I think again, to build on those four genres really help tell a story and map out this history. And then again, it allows for really cool interactions and interactives that we have in the gallery.
Maybe could you walk us through and show us some of your favorite parts? Yeah. Adiria and I walk into an alcove awash in deep blue light. It gives the impression of being surrounded and restrained with the sounds of a large wooden ship creaking in the background.
So the first section, when folks come into the gallery, they step into dark waters, which almost encloses the visitors a little bit to think about what does an uncertain future look like. And I think the interesting thing about creating dark waters is to put people in the space of under a slave ship. And it's a hard history, it's a dark history, but again, it cements the foundation of what Black music leads into. And I think, again, when it comes to understanding privilege of not identifying as a Black person, this space creates this sense of, unease that Black folks have also experienced. But it is to provide reflection. So there's tons of questions in here. There's a lot of call-out text to really get folks to think. So this has been designed as a thinking space, a reflective space, before folks really get to understand like the impact of the history from the beginning of like 1619, when the first, enslaved Africans come to the Americas.
And out of this painful history, we have the way that some of this was channeled into these genres of music that you mentioned: gospel, blues, jazz, and soul. What's next for a visitor in terms of where the music takes us?
We're going to go to gospel.
We're going to church. I see the church stained glass, beautiful window.
Yeah. I mean, for this section, I really wanted to lean in on these early oral traditions, looking at these early elements of gospel music and sound, but also culture. The fact that the Black church is a safe space, is a community space, and the ways that a lot of the early gospel artists found their home in the church, but also found that vocal strength. And so a lot of the photography in here is to capture that essence, that emotion, but also to give insight into what this Black church looks like. And then again, highlight the Black South. Again, we're thinking about the antebellum South, we're thinking about early Jim Crow, we're also thinking about just the rise of the civil rights era, and again how gospel music is the backdrop and soundtrack for these movements.
I'm sometimes up and I'm sometimes down, calling for to carry me home.
So as we leave gospel, I want to take you all into blues, which is one of my favorite sections of the exhibition. When I thought about blues, I really thought about the South, but I also really thought about Black women. And I had to dedicate a section over here that highlights Gladys Bentley, that highlights Ma Rainey, looking at, Big Mama Thornton. Again, I think oftentimes when people think about the way that women occupy music, specifically Black women, there's always this kind of push and pull of where they fit. And I really wanted to make sure that when we're talking about blues women, there is a unique story that is being told. And I think what's so interesting about blues music is that we're coming up on, the end of slavery. We're coming up into, early Jim Crow era, and we're looking at freedom. So what does Black freedom and liberation look like at this time? And what are the stories that, a lot of Black artists and musicians can talk about? And then what people can relate to. And so we start to see this diverge from the Black church, and we're starting to see this diverge from sacred music to talk about secular music.
I said, oh, baby, why you wanna do this to me, baby?
So we're moving through time, we're moving through genre. Where are you taking us next?
I mean, we can't go anywhere but jazz. Everybody knows that. Like, jazz was born in New Orleans. But ultimately, thinking about this timeline of blues, we're looking into like the early 1920s and really thinking about what does Black migration look like. So the Great Migration being this extremely large, massive move towards, the West Coast and also the East Coast. But thinking about what is this really core time and what is this really core space, and what better way to talk about jazz than the Harlem Renaissance. Again, thinking about this history and this culture in the ways that Black artists and creatives leaning on literature, leaning on painting, leaning on writing, leaning on music to again extend these stories.
The vibe in the jazz section is Art Deco, women in drop-waisted dresses, men in wide-legged suits and brimmed hats. We walk by a large gilt-edged mirror surrounded by expensive-looking wallpaper, a spot to make a phone call at the club when you step out from a set. While I'm listening to Adiria, my attention is drawn to the center of the room.
So to really have these stellar pieces sit in the middle of this section of the exhibition is really cool.
I just got chills.
Yeah.
Walking over. This is a Miles Davis trumpet. So describe the trumpet for somebody who's not seeing it right now. I mean, again, I'm just really
I love Miles
floored.
Davis.
Yeah.
I love Miles Davis so much. I love John Coltrane. And I really think, again, seeing a Miles Davis trumpet, the early 1980s Martin, trumpet, it's black and gold. It has really cool, pretty moons and stars and gold trimming. So to really see this trumpet in the space and for it to match the aesthetic of the gallery is really nice. Like, I didn't notice that until now. Like, we have these like slight hues of gold in the listening station, and the green kind of contrast with the colors really makes it stand out.
Next, Adiria takes me into a living room from the 1970s. At least that's what it looks like, with cozy wood paneling and groovy colors. This section of the exhibit is all about soul.
Utilizing soul here was important because, again, the history of the Civil Rights Movement. And I wanted to talk about, the Black Power movements as well. And then for the idea of these echoes of how a lot of soul artists leaned in on blues music and sung in the church, thinking about how gospel and blues and jazz still kind of have these connections to soul music. So this section really leans on a lot of activism, but also, again, capturing like this vocal strength. So I really love when you come into the soul section, there's this beautiful picture of Aretha Franklin done by Lee Freelander that it's just so powerful because you may have never heard an Aretha Franklin song, but you can see from this photo of her, in this bright green sweater and this really close-up shot of her singing, like, her voice is so strong and it's so powerful. For this section, again, it was important to talk about just the emergence of, these Black liberation movements and these organizations. So having commentary on social justice, talking about the rise of Black music labels, so talking about Stax Records that's coming out of Memphis and talking about Motown coming out of Detroit. These are really core points of history to show like how Black music is mobilizing, but also how now Black artists are actually getting paid for their music. And this is where that wealth starts to come in a little bit.
Stick with me here, but I'm feeling like once we're here in this like 1960s and 70s style living room, I can imagine a Black family at home with several generations in the house. And maybe the teenager is listening to Aretha, Marvin, Roberta, but their parents are more like, I don't know about this stuff. Or their grandparents are more like, I don't know about this stuff. I'm going to listen to my gospel. I'm going to listen to my jazz. But there are the threads pulling us through each successive generation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to describe the exhibition, honestly. The echoes, emphasis is not just the music, but also the ancestry of like Black community and family, and the ways that, you know, everybody who comes through this and reflects on their connection to like blues or jazz or soul. I mean, when I told my father about this exhibition, you know, he's like, I listened to Buddy Guy, and I told you about, you know, Heavy D, and I told you about, you know, Billy. I'm just like, no, you didn't. But I mean, he did. You know, my dad is definitely the inspiration to like just how much music I know. So I give him a lot of credit for that. But again, you know, to your point about generations, and again, leaning on the idea of echoes, I couldn't do this exhibition without adding in Jimi Hendrix. So when you leave the soul section, you actually step into an Echoes Theater where there's an in-house made oral history kind of documentary film. But also we have, you know, Jimi Hendrix vinyls. You know, being
his own personal vinyls. And again, the privilege of MoPop being, you know, the home to one of the largest Jimi Hendrix collections. We have that privilege. So again, I couldn't do this exhibition without bringing him up. And so to have him have this strong collection of music of Black artists, again, opens up this door again about what does Echoes look like for someone like Jimi Hendrix. And again, speaking to his love of Black music and seeing people like Nina Simone or Smokey Myers or the Four Tops or the Temptations in the collection really highlights his, you know, special curation of music. And again, to think about the ways that a lot of these artists lean on these artists before them, you know. So seeing how all these different genres connects to strengthen his sound is really important. This is so fun, Adiria. I mean, before we go, I know you're going to have school groups coming through. You're going to have a lot of people coming through. What do you hope people take away from this exhibit when they go home?
That's such a tough question. There's so many good things in here. But I think I want people to know that pop culture looks so different for so many different people. And I think I want the key takeaway to be like Black history is so deeply intertwined to Black music. And Black people are so proud of their music, and Black people are so attached to their music because it has such a rich history. And there's so much community and passion that exists where, you know, when things get appropriated, it hurts because we've built so much context and history and connection to our music that, you know, we want credit for, but we also want to feel protected from it because our music protects us. So
and to remove it from that context feels like a violation.
Yeah, and again, it's important to us, you know. And I think for Black folks who come into the space, I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel appreciated. I want them to feel joy. But I think for non-Black folks who experience the exhibit, I want them to learn something. I want them to see why we should appreciate Black music. Happy June for Black Music, you know, month. But also, again, the idea that there's a really important history that sits here that Black people, you know, are appreciative of. And I think for people to leave here is to feel inspired and to feel this connection to music that feels good. You know, I think I did a really good job of picking music that makes us feel good. So, yeah, I want people to have fun and just to understand, you know, and just respect the music that's in here.
Adiria Johnson is the curator of Never Turn Back Echoes of African American Music at Seattle's Museum of Pop Culture. Adiria, thank you so much.
Thank you. I had so much fun. Come back.
You are listening to Soundside. I'm Jason Megatron Burrows, and with it being Thursday, what kind of weekend warrior would I be if I left you high and dry without anything to go do? So here is a quick and easy version of the weekend warm-up. First up, the 2025 Queer and Trans Film Festival, presented by $3 Bill Cinema. The organization is celebrating its 30th anniversary, and they're showcasing queer stories from festivals past, as well as new local and trans-made short films. The event starts Thursday the 10th and runs through Saturday the 12th, with screenings and performances all happening at the Broadway Performance Hall and Erickson Theater in Capitol Hill. Next, the Ballard Seafood Fest. This annual event takes place in the heart of Ballard, the crossroads of Leary Way and Ballard Avenue, and it's always a wonderful celebration of seafood, live music, and Scandinavian fun. I lived in Ballard for a year, and I have been going back almost every year since. There is so much good food, so be prepared for lines, but it is worth it, especially when you find those seared scallops that I love so much. Ballard Seafood Fest runs from Friday through Sunday. Next up in Bellingham, bring your mountain bike and get ready to enjoy the mashup of cycling and live music with your friends and neighbors at the Northwest Tune-Up Festival. It's a weekend of mountain bike races, live music, beer gardens, cider pours, and so much food. There's a maker's market and chainsaw carving. It's a whole smorgasbord of Pacific Northwestisms crammed into a single weekend. And that's this weekend up in Bellingham. Finally, we bounce out to Bellevue for Japan Fair 2025. 2 entire days of hands-on exhibits, performances, cosplay, cultural workshops, seminars, an escape room, vendor booths, and so much food. It's a theme this weekend, clearly. This celebration of Japanese arts and culture takes place over at Maidenbauer Center in Bellevue and opens up at 10 a.m. on both Saturday and Sunday. Now, those are only a handful of the festivals happening this weekend. I will toss links to these events and a few more on our website. As usual, you can send me events via email, soundside@KUOW.org. And for even more events, you can check out KUOW's arts podcast, Meet Me Here. And that is it for Soundside this week. I am producer Jason Megatron Burrows. Today's show was produced by me with support from Sarah Leibovitz, Hans Anderson, Gabrielle Healy, and Malia Syed. Our editor is Jed Kim. Tomorrow, don't miss out on Week in Review with Bill Radke. Soundside will be back with brand new episodes on Monday. And we'll see you then, right here on KUOW 94.9, Seattle's NPR news station.